guess I'll show you a video eventually, but that'll be after we talk a little bit about the family crucible. But, people will surprise you, Sometimes we're pleasantly surprised, and sometimes we're disappointingly surprised, right? I mean, people can actually do some nice things for you out of the blue, and you don't expect it. And you just feel very honored that they did something for you when that's not their habit, that sort of thing. And then there are times when people who you have come to expect, consistency from, and so forth, and so forth, you get a little disappointed. But that's human nature, isn't it? I mean, we're not going to run into people who are going to be perfect all the time, unfortunately. My mother, as many of you probably know, has Alzheimer's, and she's had it now for a number of years. She's to that point in the disease where she can't really communicate. I mean, the only thing she can say is and it's never it's whether the question requires a yes or a no, it's type of thing. I have decided I'm going to start reading her stories, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Okay, they have some really touching stories in those series, those books, and Jerry can vouch for this. The last time I read her a story, or the last few times, actually he can't vouch for all these times, but the last few times I've read her a story, I can see a little tear, just in the corner of her eye. So I know something's getting in. She'll actually focus when I read the story. If I can show, she always has, in her lifetime, had been an Elvis Presley fan. So if I can get a video of Elvis Presley, she'll watch it. So there's still something going on there in my mother, who, again, tragically has Alzheimer's disease and has had it for years. This last time I read a story to her, again, a little tear, about halfway through the story, she vocalized something.
Yeah, we just think
we couldn't figure out what she said, and she couldn't repeat it. But that was the first time in a long time she tried to verbalize something. And you see those little things, and you think to yourself, there's still something going on in here. And maybe in time, some miracle will happen with Alzheimer's, and my mom will be able to benefit from that process. Something new will emerge as a treatment process, and they won't have these extended trials, because right now my mom is in the severe stages, and usually they start at mild, moderate, and the trials could take years before they get to severe cases. So I just hope and pray that sometime down the road that will happen for her. But I remember years ago, I didn't really know this about my mom, about how great a memory she had before the disease hit her. And one day I decided she was quite a bingo-holic, loved bingo. I mean, that was her world, her life. She loved that game. And I wanted to see what this was all about. What was so great about bingo. Of course, I kind of knew what the game was about, but I just wanted. So I went, Jerry and I, together, we went with her and got, 3 cards, 4 cards,
Yeah,
5 cards,
no
something
more
like
than
that.
5.
My mom had like 30 or 40 or 50 cards. That's my mom. Okay?
On the table, all at
On the
once.
table, all at once. One shot, right? And here we are. They're calling out the numbers, right? My mom gets up. She goes to the food line, and she's getting her, not Adams or anything, like getting her potatoes, her meat, and all that stuff. And she's, she must have taken about 5 minutes or so to go from the beginning of the line to the end of the line to get back to the table. And in the midst of that time frame, whether it was 5 or 7 minutes, they had called 7, 8 numbers and letters, 7B, 5, whatever it was, okay? So she sits down in front of her cards, remember 30, 40, 50 cards in front of her. She's got one of these, you have these ink things. Of course, you can have these magnetic things too, but she had the ink things. And she goes like, mind you, she's listening to the numbers. Boom, 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 on her cards. You know, she looks at my card and she goes like, boom, boom. She goes, boom, 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 or something like that, you know?
We missed one.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, the thing is that I had no idea she had a memory like that. And then to see her go from that memory to no memory is a devastating thing. So, you know, people are surprising. Sometimes there's something there, we just don't know how to access it.
Have you ever seen The Notebook, the movie?
Yes,
Yeah,
The
that's
Notebook with, what's his
Ryan
name?
Gosling
Yeah, and Jennifer
Rachel-
Lawrence?
No,
No.
Rachel McAdams.
No, okay,
Oh, you're
no.
thinking of Silver
I'm thinking
Lining
Silver
Playbook.
Lining then.
Oh, okay.
No, not The Notebook.
Yeah, in The Notebook, it's a love story that
Uh-huh.
woman has Alzheimer's, and her husband reads her the story of them.
Now I
every
gotta see
day.
that. Now that,
Yeah,
yes,
so that's what it reminded
I've
me
heard
of.
of the title, The Notebook, but I
Mhm.
never knew what it was associated with.
So I don't know what would happen if you wrote the story of your life and read it to your mom.
I know every so often I will go through the history I know
Mhm.
about my mother and her siblings and her parents and how she met my father and that sort of thing. And I can tell she's kind of listening, you know? And at other times, if I don't do any of that stuff, I'm just there. I'm not really, you know, I'm not really her daughter. So it's amazing what actually could still be there that we just can't we just don't know how to access yet. That's the challenge with this disease. If something is there, how are we going to access it?
You and I have spoken before that we share the same situation with my mom said.
Yeah,
I remember my mother was having an episode and
yeah.
my son was a baby and we were at urgent care
Mhm.
and she didn't know who I was. She thought my son might be me, but she didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And I was going through her purse trying to get her information.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to look and the nurse is saying, number for this, social
Mhm.
security, and the doctor's saying, what year is this, and, you know,
Right,
that whole.
trying to get the
getting that. She
Stuff
didn't-
that should be there.
Yeah,
Right.
didn't know, it was Eisenhower, and, you know, my son was me, and she didn't know who I was.
Right, right.
But in the background, as the nurse is getting this information, she said, what's the group number on our insurance card? And I heard over, and my mom wasn't a numbers person at all.
But she
She
listed
recited
it.
the number it was like switch
Boom.
on,
Switch.
recited the number all the way, and then switch off, and I would,
Yeah, and that's the irony of the disease. At times, you may see moments of brilliance
yep,
amidst, declining abilities. I mean, there was a point when my mom initially had the diagnosis, she was told she shouldn't be driving. We were told she shouldn't be driving. And we did all sorts of things to make sure that that didn't happen.
Sabotage the car.
My husband had sabotaged the car, undid the battery
battery
cables or whatever. Eventually, we lost the key to, and she came up with this brilliant idea of calling the dealership so they could come out and make a new key. Now, I tell you, that takes a little sophistication to think about that, and so these moments of brilliance, and yet other moments that didn't make any sense. Here's one of them. I mean, she would say something. One day she was just firmly convinced somebody had broken into the house. We weren't living with her. She was by herself at that time. Somebody had broken into the house, gotten into the dresser or the buffet cabinet, stole her cigarettes, replaced them with their cigarettes. See, and there was nothing I could do to rationalize that story away. Mom, now think about it, Mom. Why would someone steal your cigarettes and replace them that's not a win-win. So it make more sense for them just to take your cigarettes, take your purse, take everything else out of the house that they could get away with, not just your cigarettes. No. So I learned very quickly, sort of like when you're working with an alcoholic or someone who's addicted to drugs, you don't do therapy on someone who is stoned out of his or her head. You're wasting your time, right? When my mom was paranoid, I just changed topics, because I'm exhausting myself trying to rationalize something away that isn't going to be rationalized. I'm wasting her time, I'm wasting my time, and everybody's getting stressed out. Why do that? Just change the topic to something more interesting. Find something interesting to talk about. So we had those moments. One time I backed into, we were visiting my aunt's place. I backed the car in because she asked me to back it in to the driveway so it would be easier for her to get out because she never liked staying, at family events. She was like always the first one to go. So I knew I would stay and somebody would take me back to my mom's place. But she wanted to get out. So, well, when it was time for her to leave, she tried to start the car, it would not start. All right? There was no click, no nothing. Well, anyone who knows anything about cars is probably going to say the starter. There's something wrong with the starter, right? My mom was convinced it was because I backed into the space. That's why the car would not start. In her mind, that's what it was. And again, no rationalization could deter her from that interpretation. So I just changed the topic. That's what I tried to do. So we have disappointments in life. We have things that go wrong. And we hope for things to be fixed over time. One can hope for a miracle, and that they'll find a cure for things. But I love these verses from Romans 8 with 35, so I'll just read it to you. Who shall separate us? You've heard this, right? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? I'm going to stop right there because I got to just share one more story. The nakedness thing. One of my first jobs was working in a nursing home as a nurse's aide. And I worked the graveyard shift. And most of the time, everybody fell asleep. I was the one who tried to keep people awake. I did pranks. I did all sorts of things. I did really stupid things to try to keep people awake. Sometimes I was successful and sometimes I wasn't. But one night when everybody was asleep, an elderly man had his light on, and that meant he needed assistance. So I went to his room. He was the only one in that room. There were 2 beds in that room. He was the only one in there. And he said, and he was a delusional guy. We talked about this last time, didn't we? Delusions, right? Mm-hmm. Delusions are false beliefs, right? So he was delusional. He was typically delusional. And the first thing he said when he saw me, there was just fear written all over his face. He said, "There's a naked lady underneath my bed. There's a naked lady underneath my bed." So I went into calm him down mode, which I did, and I just talked to him very softly. I said, "I'm sure she'll go away after a while. We'll be okay. Well, she's just a nice lady, she's just here to protect you." Type of thing. I got him calmed down, and then something in my head said, "Look underneath the bed." Don't know. So I looked underneath the bed, and wouldn't you know it, you know the end of the story, there was a naked lady underneath the bed. It was another resident who couldn't walk. So the best I could figure is that she got out of her bed, crawled, somehow got by everybody. Well, most people were asleep, but I guess it would be easy to get by everybody that way. But lost her robe in the process, went into his room and decided the best place for her was underneath his bed. So It's an interesting story. I mean, when I shared it with everybody, they just couldn't believe it. But yeah, she wasn't hurt or anything, and she wasn't cognitively there either. You know, she must have been cold, but I got her back into her bed and that sort of thing. And I realized, you know, sometimes people might be delusional, but they might be telling you the truth. You know, hello. You know, and you know, sometimes you think somebody who's with it may actually be delusional. You know, so anyway, I digress. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness, that got me into that story, or peril or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. And one last thing I'll leave you guys with on that note. I had this, some of you may have already seen it, because I've shared it in other classes. I had a professor, bless her heart, Dr. Marion Merchant, when I was going through my graduate program at Andrews University. She drew a line on the board, and she said, this line represents eternity. You know, the arrow goes forever that way. The arrow goes forever that way. And then she drew a little tiny dot on the board. Just the tiniest, can't even get it to write. This is the tiniest dot. And she said, our lives, no matter how long they are, 50 years, 60, 70, 100 years, is just a moment in time, in the context of eternity. It's just a moment. So if you're going through some bad times right now, this too will pass. It's only a moment in time when you consider that we have eternity to look forward to. And again, you know, that's great hope right there. That keeps you going sometimes when things are going against you. Wonderful. This too shall pass. So let's end on that note. Shall we pray? Father, we thank you for not only a life to live, but the ability to understand that we're not alone. We have family, we have friends, we have loved ones, we have you. And with you, nothing can defeat us. We know we'll have good days, we'll have bad days, but in the end game is already decided. And we'll have eternity to spend with you if we take you up on your offer of grace. In your son's name. Amen. All right, so with that, let's talk a little bit about the family crucible. So you're up to 10 chapters, right? 10 chapters. The first chapter, that got interesting, didn't it? Started us off with a fury, I should say. First of all, interestingly, who wasn't at the family meeting? You remember? The son, the boy, Don. Don was not there, all right? And you know, the family didn't seem too concerned about that, right? But the therapists were concerned about that. Why were they concerned? You remember?
They felt like Dawn was the one that, like, maybe had more to do with the family than they were letting on, and maybe he was the reason that, like, they were testing it out. So, like,
Yeah.
kind of like that
Yeah.
scapegoat.
It was kind of a two-pronged thing. He had a voice, number one. Every family member has a view of the family situation. So he's going to see things perhaps a little bit differently than other members of the family. So that in and of itself, he had a voice. And it was important to hear his voice. And you know, sometimes they'll play the person who, as the therapist said, suggested he might have been elected to not be there. They might have been testing the waters with therapy, you know. I mean, therapy is a big step for a lot of people, you know. and you want to know if you're in credible hands. Are these people going to be able to really help you? So they might have elected Don to stay out just to test the waters. What kind of people are we working with here? You know? And interestingly enough, the therapist absolutely positively refused to start without Don. And they were kind of going like, why? You know, why, you know, what's, you know, he was told to be here. It's not our fault he's not here. Why don't we just go ahead and start? So they almost had to draw a line in the sand. Sorry, we're just not going to start. You know, his voice is too important. And then they countered. They said, well, didn't he know how important this meeting was? You guys said it was an emergency. Did you not communicate the seriousness of the situation to him? And they had to say, yes, we did. They had to own it, didn't they? Yeah. The clients will test the water. So late for appointment, that was another feature that I noticed in that chapter. One of the therapists, did you catch it, was late for the appointment. Do you remember the rationalization or how he kind of explained that?
It gives them time to introduce.
Yeah. Give the other therapist time to introduce him, let him know what role he's going to be playing in the therapeutic process. He said this is probably an unconscious thing on his end, but he unconsciously probably gave his co-therapist time to prep the family, you know, for his arrival. And that could absolutely be true. Absolutely, positively be true. I don't contest that on any level. But on the other hand, one of the things I learned in this profession is that you're never late to an appointment. Because if you're late to a client's appointment, what are you saying to that client?
Not important.
Yeah, I don't care. Not important. My stuff is more important than your stuff, right? Yeah. I'm not organized. I'm not, you know, all sorts of things. But it's communicating something we don't want to communicate to our client. So I don't doubt that unconsciously may have been at play. But the general rule is you don't be late to appointments. Now, we expect it in the medical profession, don't we? We bring books. We read. We do homework. One time I had to wait 4 hours for an appointment. You know? What's the longest you've ever had to wait? Come on, tell me. Longest?
A day at the
An hour?
2 hours.
Like when you're sitting there.
For a scheduled appointment. A scheduled appointment. What's the longest you've had to wait? Hour and a half?
Hours.
2 hours.
2 hours?
Think about that until it got canceled.
So yeah, then they just reschedule, right?
But people never really complain officially.
No, we don't. We expect it.
And an appointment at financial aid.
Oh yeah, well, we expect it. We expect that, right? We do. But we bring books to medical appointments. We understand that this is just the way it's supposed to be.
To my great sorrow and shame, I actually missed an appointment once with a client.
Yeah.
But that next appointment was free.
Yeah.
It was,
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and the one thing that I always, if in a very rare occasion did it happen when I was in the military, if I was late to an appointment, I always owned it. I would apologize, and oftentimes they would say, "Oh, not a problem." And every single time they would say that, I would say, "It is a problem. I am so sorry. It's so disrespectful to not have been here on time. It is. You're being very, very gracious and very forgiving, but that was disrespectful on my end."
Did you say you were in the military?
Yes.
What was it? Which branch?
The Army. I was in the Army for about 6 years. I was the chief of psychology services and the chief of psychiatry and neurology at the General Leonard Wood Army Community Hospital. Before that, I was an intern at General Eisenhower Army Medical Center in Fort Gordon, Georgia. I joined for the internship. See, that's what got me into the military. It's just not because I wanted to be in the military, but I would get paid. I wanted a paid internship. In those days, you didn't get paid for an internship. These days, you probably don't get paid for an internship either, but unless you join the military. So I got into the military. All right, so, but get this, I had a psychiatrist who, at one point in time, before she allowed me to become the chief of psychiatry and neurology, she was the chief of psychiatry and neurology. She had an appointment with a client and didn't show. And they called all around for her, trying to find her. Finally, they found her on the inpatient ward. They got her down. It was like 45 minutes after the appointment. Well, she didn't have time to see her then, so she rescheduled the next day. The next day, she wasn't there either. Ooh. Now the client was now hopping mad, and rightly so. She asked to be reassigned to somebody else, which she was. But again, it's different for us compared to the medical field. You expect in the medical field, this is not what you would expect in the mental health field. It's so disrespectful to do that. So if you head in that direction, be on time.
I think
Okay.
it's disrespectful in the medical field.
What's
I think
that?
it's disrespectful in the medical field too, but it's a little more understandable when you have different patients.
Yeah, there, and if you're in a triage situation going into ER, you know, especially. And they are gonna triage someone with a bullet shot wound
Oh,
over
absolutely.
your stub toe or something like that, you know, of course, yeah. Did you catch the arrangement of the room?
Yeah.
What was going on there? Anybody who, it was kind of rectangular, wasn't it? They had 2 sofas, and then like 3 chairs, and then on one side was the therapist chairs. Now, why do you think they had like 2 whole sofas, 3 chairs, and then 2 therapist chairs on the other side?
Try and unite mom and dad together. but
Yeah, together, right?
didn't go that way.
And the number of chair choices, because there was only, there was the parents, there was Don, there's Claudia, and there's Laura. I mean, there's more than enough seating for everybody. But sometimes you look for how families sit down, where they sit. This gives you information, sometimes very, very good clinical information on coalitions, alliances, that sort of thing, animosities, you know. If you got one child sitting all by himself or herself over in the corner, something's happening in that family situation for that child to have decided to sit by himself or herself, right? So that gives you information. Now these days we would still do the same thing. We'd have lots of seating choices, lots of different seating choices, because not everybody's going to want to sit in the sofa. Not everyone wants to sit in just a single chair, recliner or whatever. Not everyone wants to sit in one of these things. Lord knows we don't want to sit in one of these things for 3 hours, right? But you want lots of seating choices because you want someone to choose and be comfortable, right? Because already they're anxious about the therapeutic process, so choice is important. And today, the therapists generally, or at least the way I was trained, we generally don't sit together. One of us sits over here, and the other one sits like in a circle, probably on the other side. Can you think of any reasons why that might be helpful? Together, there might be an alliance, you're working together, that's good. But what about apart? What are the advantages there?
It can break up the focus of the power as far as if you put everybody who's in charge.
It's like
right
us
here.
against them. It could be interpreted that way.
In relation to that, it also makes everybody feel as important as.
Yeah, it's kind of like nobody's higher than anybody else. You definitely don't want your seat to be higher. Have you seen that? Sometimes
Or
the
bigger.
doctors, physicians, their seat is like way higher than your seat is. You're looking up at them. Well, that's saying something about status, isn't it? We don't want to have those kinds of conversations or communications in therapy. We want to be at the same level. But also, when you split each other up, they might see something that you won't see, because if you're both sitting together, you're seeing you know. But apart, you might be able to see a broader range of things happening. You might catch something that the other person doesn't catch. Now, there's also discussion about, you know, should you have 2 males, 2 females, or a male and female? What do you guys think?
I think in group counseling is helpful if you can have more female.
What's the advantages of a male
Racial
and female?
dynamics, everyone's represented and different point of views.
There's more representation, right? So there's more resonating. If it's a group of males and females, it's a, you know, there's some more stuff resonating, maybe with the same sex. Also, you might even get some things that don't resonate with the opposite sex. So some things can come out that might not come out if it's this, you know, 2 people of the same sex, right? So sometimes it's nice to have the male and female. But bottom line is, sometimes you don't have the luxury of choosing. The most important thing is, can you 2 work together well? Can you be on the same sheet of music? That's probably more important than gender, right? Can you be on the same sheet of music? If you can do that, then that's good. So how did they start out? Do you remember? How did they start the therapy out?
They start initiating it.
They started with some questions. You know, the first question, tell me about the family. Remember? Tell me about the family. That's a real open-ended question. Yeah. Now, you know, they're bringing Claudia there because she's the problem, right? So that's starting out with, you know, tell me about the family. And nobody knew how to answer that question. And actually, Carl had to say, okay, well, the structure of the family is high energy, there's a lot of noise. Are there coalitions? Are there alliances? Are there, you know, dyads? And he had to give a lot of examples before he could get actually some information out. Because they didn't come there to talk about the family. They came there to talk about Claudia. And when you're working with a family, you know, you want to work with the family, not just Claudia. The neat thing, though, is that was the kind of the only thing that they did. They basically then stopped and said, you know, hey, listen, we're not starting until Don gets here. So what happened then? Do you remember? They weren't going to continue if Don wasn't there, so they had to try to get a hold of Don. So Mom tried to call Don a couple times, couldn't get Don. And so, you know, so in the end, what happened to the session?
Moved to next morning.
That's right. They weren't meeting, you know. If it was an emergency, he would have been here, basically was the rationale. Because, and Carl said that, wasn't I clear that everybody had to be at the session? He asked them, and Carolyn said that to Mom. Yes, you were quite clear about that. Okay, so there's, this is where you're setting the ground rules. You know, if in a sense therapy is about trust, but it's also about structure. If you allow the family to run the group process, you're not helping them, right? So this was a battle for structure, basically, in the end. And Carl and Augustus were okay with just being silent and waiting. That's what they did until the session was terminated. So they were trying to establish ground rules. In the meantime, they did a little chit-chatting, you know, and up came the sculpture. You remember that part? Right? Yeah. It represented Carl's grandfather. At first, you know, the family kind of laughed, you know, weren't sure if they should be laughing, because it was a very abstract piece of art type of thing, and that was his grandfather. And then Augustus said something like, you think that's funny? You should see his grandmother. You know, so humor is a good thing when you're doing therapy. You know, sometimes it relaxes people. That got a laugh out of everybody. You know, but, you know, the neat thing about something like that is it can be a nice conversation starter. It can relax people. You know, people see a piece of abstract art very differently. You can interpret it in different ways. And you know, but the way Carl, defined his grandfather was how? Do you remember? Richard? Yeah, he was kind of, he's a tough guy. Tough guy. What happened when he had gangrene? Remember that? You guys can't. If you read that chapter, you can't forget that part. He cut it off with his own pocket knife. He cut his own toe off. This is a tough guy. And Carl said he got that because it reminded him of his grandfather, and he kind of thought maybe he wanted a little of that toughness in him, you know? So that was just a little chit chat. But it's starting to model that it's okay to share things, to be vulnerable with people. And you know, it's not that the therapy is all about you, the clinician. You don't just self-share just because, you know, I have a problem and now I need to share this with you, my client, so you can help me fix my problem. That's not what therapy is about, right? But there are times when self-sharing is actually a positive thing. Right? You're modeling some good stuff. Okay, so you know, then the family, you know, threw out a little. Sometimes they threw out this desperate thing. You know, we got to have a session because we think Claudia is suicidal. Oh my goodness! Don't tell me they're going to go there right away. Okay? And it's kind of interesting because, you know, then they went back to the thing. Well, weren't we clear if this was an emergency that, you know, Don would be here? And then what was kind of interesting is they turned to Laura. Remember Laura? Mm-hmm. It's kind of neat that they had a little girl in there. You know, what do you, you know, in a sense, they were kind of testing out whether, you know, Laura felt that things would be able to work out, and, you know, that the suicidal thing was not such a big deal type of thing. And also, they also tested the waters with Laura. Do you think we can fix what's going on? They wanted to de-escalate what the family was trying to escalate. They wanted to de-escalate. And Laura basically, you know, kind of smiled, kind of, you know, kind of agreed, you know, the family could work some things out. They said to Laura, this was their closing statement, do you think we can teach them how to love? I like that. Do you think we can teach them how to love? What he's saying is, do you guys think you can learn how to love? He's talking through Laura now. And that's how that first session ended, which was kind of interesting. Who had chapter 2?
Nobody.
I think you have 1 through 5 as everyone.
Yeah, but then a couple people stayed by last time, and I was kind of doling it out. You had 4. Did I give you chapter 2? Okay. You want to kind of maybe just share what you thought was the most interesting thing for you on chapter 2? Yeah. Oh, okay. Don't hit the book yet. Okay. We'll go through it, and then later on, when you do get the book, you just kind of chime in terms of what you thought was most interesting. The book is on reserve at the library for anybody who doesn't have it. I have 2 or 3 books on reserve in 2-hour slots. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so now Don shows up, right? Don shows up. And one of the first things they said to Don was, why do you think you were elected not to come? They didn't pull any punches, did they? Why do you think you were elected not to come? And what did Don say?
So they can yell at me.
Yeah. Not quite sure. Maybe he said they can yell at me, you know. that sort of thing. But they didn't pull any punches. They said, hey, don't sell yourself short. We think you were probably helping the family decide whether they would come a second time or not. They kind of, again, they're calm the way they see it, whether you agree or not. That's how they saw it. You're trying to help the family make a decision there. And now David, the dad, gets a little upset with this process. And says, can we get started? It's a little irritated now. And so what does Carl do? He kind of says fairly quickly, well, could you start us out? Go ahead, start us out. Now David's backing up and going like, well, I think my wife should start, really. I was going to step in here, but no, I better. And then Carl kind of goes back and says, all the more reason for you to start. Sometimes the dad's voice needs to be heard, and sometimes it gets submerged sometimes. So go ahead and start. There's a little testing in the waters, isn't it? Again, a battle for structure, control in the session, right? So he does end up starting and says, oh, Claudia has some problems, and there's lots of fights between Claudia and Carolyn, and then Carl asks, well, where are you in all of this? And he says, well, sometimes I'm defending Claudia. Remember that? And then he talks a little more about her problems, Claudia's problems. She's into poetry now. She's talking more about death and dying and that sort of thing. She's also having some unexplained aches and pains and ringing in her ears. And there's talk about schizophrenia and on and on. There's definitely a lot of focus on Claudia. And again, this is where they get back into that conversation. How's family structured and that sort of thing. And David is having problems answering some of those questions. But Don is not at a loss for words here. And it's evident why Don wasn't there, because Don is really telling you the whole truth behind the facade here. Yeah, he says basically Claudia says something. This is how it typically goes. When Claudia says something, Mom yells. Claudia sulks. Dad will try to console Claudia. Claudia runs up to her room, locks herself in, and again, Dad tries to figure out what's going on. No one's happy. Eventually, Claudia comes down, and again, no one's happy. That's the dance. You heard me talk about dances before. This is a dance. You pretty much know the end from the beginning with the first step. But now it's escalated. And instead of this prior dance, now Claudia is just leaving. She's gone. And now they're starting to get more worried, and this is what's bringing them into treatment. So Claudia is leaving the house. And the fights have been escalating for the last 6 months. And do they fight, here's a good question, do they fight about other things other than Claudia? Do you remember what else they fight about?
They fight about the mother.
Yeah. And his work, right? Yeah, so now, see, at first we had a decoy, what I call a decoy. Now we're getting to something. So, the work, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's underneath all that, but they try to point out how Dad's work, Dad's spending more time at work. Claudia is spending more time running to her room or leaving the house. Well, what are the parallels there? Escape, get away. So in a sense, they're doing similar things, right? And what's Dad mad at Mom for?
His mother.
Don knows. Her mom, right? Yeah. And maybe she's a controlling figure. We do find out later she's a controlling figure, right? So as they're focusing on this stuff, what happens to Claudia? What's happening to Claudia? Say?
She's getting more emotional.
As the focus is moving more on mom and dad, yeah. She was initially getting emotional when it was starting, it was very much focused on her, but as it starts moving away from her, she starts to relax. She's a, whoo, you know, it must be a relief. They came here to talk about her and they're not being allowed to talk about her, right? All right. And then they kind of, again, they use the child here to kind of de-escalate tension. It's a nice de-escalation, you know. Whose team are you on, Laura? Remember that? And she says, nobody's. And who do you go to, you know, who do you go to for help? Mommy, and sometimes Daddy. Okay. Who are you worried about the most? Oh, Claudia leaving. And then she adds that mom and dad were divorced. Okay, and we think young kids don't get it. Oh, yeah, they do. They get a lot more than we think. And some people would say, oh, you shouldn't have these young kids here in the therapy, the family therapy session, but they actually can de-escalate some of the tension, but they can also be valuable sources of information. Because I bet the parents did not sense on any level that that child knew that there was that kind of marital tension.
Like, kind of has something to do with it, but my niece is like 4, I think, and her parents have a tendency to watch telenovelas while their daughter's playing, and so I don't know if you guys have ever seen Spanish soap operas. They're ridiculous. But so the little girl's playing with her toys, and then one day she got mad at me for something, and she said that she was going to take away my boyfriend, and that then at the end they were going to divorce because he wasn't financially stable, and like she gave me a whole rundown, and I was like,
where did this get from? And later, yeah, this is the whole soap.
she had completely absorbed this entire season going on, and she was completely like reciting it to me what was going to happen.
Never
because I had-
let her see a reality
Yeah.
show. Well, I think no reality shows for this girl.
And so it's crazy how well they understand, and we always think that, oh, they're not paying attention.
Yeah,
No, they're
you
not.
know, I heard the other day that a 6-year-old committed suicide.
What?
Yeah, and that's the second one I've heard about, you know, over the years. Yeah, we don't think that they're capable at that young age of not wanting to live or knowing how to kill themselves. But she left a note. She left a note. She left a note.
Do they know why?
I think the parents were fighting and having problems in the marriage. Sometimes kids will do it because they're being bullied and that sort of thing. We see that.
Yeah, but it's 6,
more and
you have
more.
enough presence
But
of
at
mind
6,
to-
it's very unusual. Yeah, but you have to admit, these days, kids are being exposed to much more information than we were ever exposed to. And they're picking up on messages that perhaps we never, you know, were exposed to. They're understanding much more. You know, and if they're depressed, if something's not going right in the family situation, they probably have heard of stories of people committing suicide. You know, they're not dummies. They're not dummies.
I was just gonna kind of add to what you said. At the MPS that I work at, we get kids as young as 5, and a lot of times it is for suicide attempts or aggression and things.
They might try to throw themselves out of a car. They might try. The one 6-year-old I heard about took a rope and from a crib hung herself. Yeah. Now she was 6. It was her sibling's crib, but she knew enough to put the rope around her neck. Yeah. I mean, this is So kids know a lot more than what we think they
I
know.
also want to add like the parental supervision. Like I can tell how many times just recently I've been in like a PG-13 or R-rated movie and I hear a little child crying or
Yeah,
laughing.
they're seeing some. Why are they at this movie?
12 at night.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, when I was little, I watched The Exorcist, and that was pretty bad back in Twilight Zone. Oh, Lord. Yeah. And they asked, you know, Laura, do you think Claudia might kill herself? Yes, and she started crying, right?
Isn't Claudia only like 6'2" in this?
I'm sorry.
Like, isn't Claudia like 6 in this too?
Oh, Laura is 6, and
Laura is
Claudia
6, sorry.
is older, much older.
So I mix the two up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's easy to do because like Claudia, Carolyn, you know, who's who type of thing. Laura. But the neat thing about turning to the child is that now the parents, again, they're starting to understand that the child knows more than they thought that she knew. And they better get serious about the treatment process. They better do that.
And having her as part of the group also reminds them that she's somebody they don't want to hurt, as they've hurt each other already.
Right.
And like a pure.
Laura has
purity
not been
symbol.
scapegoated yet. Given enough time, if Claudia leaves the picture and Don leaves the picture, she might be the scapegoat. See, that usually is a progression, you know, because if there are problems in the marriage and they want to distract themselves from problems in the marriage, usually the child sometimes volunteers to act out, you know, or they're elected to act out. You know, they become a distraction. The parents unify. You know, it's sort of like two parents are fighting, right? I mean, they're fighting. They're viciously fighting. Kid runs, trips, falls, head's bleeding. What do the parents do?
Go to her.
They were right in the midst of, now they're comforting the child. They take the child to the ER. So they do stop fights, do they not? They do stop fights. And Claudia was elected to do that in this family situation. Or she volunteered, one or the other. Well, not being conscious about it. So anyway, so they used Laura to help the family see the seriousness of the situation, right? And also to get a feeling for where Laura is at. Then they asked Mom, how does she see things? And she doesn't know what to say, and then they say, wish you would try to tell us what you see. And she eventually starts fighting. She's worried about the struggle with Claudia, and she's worried about the marriage. She owns it. And then she adds something else, which I thought was very interesting. She says, I wonder if the marriage ever really existed. That's amazing. Okay. So you can see there's a lot of pain here. There's a lot of hurt here. Yes, there's anger, but always think of anger as being a secondary emotion. Now, I've used this example before. When you're in heavy traffic, somebody cuts in front of you, you swerve, right? You get angry. But what happened before the anger occurs?
Scared.
Fear. Whenever you start to see fighting and anger, underneath it all is fear. Fear of losing somebody. All right? So they talk about dependency and how sometimes when we get too dependent and people start leaning on each other too much, sometimes we get disappointed with the results, and then sometimes relationships start to fray, and then sometimes fissures occur, and sometimes anger results, and then we get these conflicts that emerge, and sometimes a child volunteers, either consciously or unconsciously, to break it up, to get them on the same sheet of music. And they're trying to get this message across to this family again and again, that Claudia may be the go-to person for this process. So anyway, it's a dance. Go back to it again and again. It's a dance. And then they did something kind of interesting. They asked Mom and Claudia to change places in terms of the seating arrangement. Did you catch that? Yeah. What were they doing with that? Yeah, trying to get Mom and Dad together where they belong, and the kids in the spot where they deserve to be, free of this conflict, right? So they were physically trying to create that symbolism there, and hopefully the parents caught on. Okay. And at the end, they summarized everything, and again, they talked about the dance. Okay. Chapter 3. You got an easy chapter. What'd you get out of chapter 3?
More than the length of it would suggest.
Yes, good.
So the chapter began, and I thought it was interesting how so early on in the book, he included a conversation that was after the therapy, several months after the therapy.
Okay.
And I'm not totally sure if that was necessary or even helpful, although I don't hate it. But the one good thing out of it was the reader could get a perspective on how, that they're alive at least.
Yeah.
That they're okay.
That they're okay, they made it.
Yeah.
And, go ahead.
No, please.
Did you remember anything about schizophrenia being mentioned in that
That's the next
chapter?
chapter.
Is that the next one? That's not chapter 3? They elaborated on schizophrenia. But in chapter 3, they introduced the concept that a psychiatrist and a psychologist working with Claudia might have been schizophrenic. And I can tell you, by what the interactions that we just saw in chapter 1 and 2, that did not sound like schizophrenia to me. I mean, she's not displaying the symptoms you would associate with schizophrenia. They talked a little bit about Freud. Did you catch any of that?
Yeah, both of these background parts you were mentioning, I wasn't angry, but I was irritated, both by those individuals that we don't get to meet in the book.
Yeah, the psychiatrist and the other psychologists.
Right.
Yeah. Because they probably, what they did is that they interfered with
Stayed loyal
the
to
time that, time was lost by going down these what seems evident to be unsubstantiated roads.
And just to wonder what could have happened
Exactly.
if they kept going down that
Exactly.
road. And then it really hit me when, I think it was this chapter, when they were talking about how many practitioners, at least in their time, probably much less now. This is in the 70s, right? Late 70s?
Yeah, the book was written, I think, in the 60s, actually.
Oh, 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed he's smoking with Laura.
A
there.
pipe,
That-
yeah. Get a
bothered me
pipe.
so much.
Slowly lights
In the context of the period of the time, I guess
Yeah.
it's okay. But when they mentioned how many practitioners were staying loyal to Freud
Yes.
at the expense of
Yes.
the
Yeah,
clients.
and don't get me wrong, I like Freud for a lot of things, his ideas about defense mechanisms. I think he's right on track with that stuff. We fight anxiety with defense mechanisms. We project blame onto other people. We deny things. We do all. And here's another thing. There's nothing new under the sun. Freud talked about making the unconscious conscious. That's how you treat people. You make the unconscious conscious. But Rogers said it also. A lot of the other clinicians or the other personality development theorists said it, that they called it different things. For example, Rogers called it insight. Do you get it? Making the unconscious conscious. Insight. Okay, it's the same concept. So, but Freud, of course, got really hooked on psychosexual themes, and the contemporary version, which is psychodynamic therapy, focuses on psychosocial things. I think that's more appropriate. Yeah. But if you look at Freud's history, you probably would understand why he focused on psychosexual. But we won't go down there in this class. We do it in another class. But anyway, yeah. So yes, Freud had some issues.
And also how Freud's whole thing that is helpful in parts came from a mistake or a failed experiment or a failed idea, and he went the opposite way to overcompensate for that. And I was just telling myself, that is such a scary thing to be so reverent about a human being who may have gone that direction purely to escape something in his life or in his mind or career, and then people are just following like sheep to the slaughter.
Right. And people, if you were to come up with your own personality theory, you would base it on your life experiences. How could you not, right? You know, but yeah, his was kind of way out there in many respects, and a lot of followers, you know, pick it up and had different versions, and then eventually in time people moved away from it. But interestingly, Freud was very angry at people who challenged his theories. I mean, and you see that with a lot of the theories.
All the more reason to be suspicious of what he's doing.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
to digress just a little bit, when I was thinking about these things with this chapter, I was reminded once again how lucky we are, assuming we're all faith-based
Mhm.
people in the classroom,
Mhm.
how blessed we are to have the knowledge, the awareness of God,
Right.
even just existing.
Right, right.
And to
Gives us
hopefully
great
be basing what we're doing on not just our work, but
Exactly.
on the Holy Spirit's
Exactly.
guidance.
Yeah.
To know that there's a being higher than any theorist, any Freud-like figure
Yeah, you
in
know,
the world.
and it's interesting, the more that you're in this profession, the more you see that you're using a lot of skills that are Christ-based. You may not call them, you know, like unconditional acceptance. Where does that come from? Well, when you think about it, God, unconditional acceptance. We don't even have the ability to do that on our own. You know, it does come from God, you know. But Rogers never called it something spiritual. He called it unconditional acceptance. But yeah, we do see that there probably was a serious waste of time with the first couple of clinicians that she worked with. And to work individually with just Claudia fell very short, given what we saw taking place in the first 10 chapters of this book.
Isn't that sometimes kind of a relief in a family systems therapy where it's like, okay, let's just get this identified, okay, this is it, okay, we can go with this and stuff.
It depends on the family. Sometimes, you know, sometimes it takes a long time to get the concept of the dance. I like to call it dance.
Yeah.
But it does make sense. This is a dance. You know,
Very well
and
choreographed.
and parents install these buttons, and we learn how these dances go, and we know the end step from the beginning step, and we just can't help ourselves to do this entire dance. Therapy is all about learning a different dance, really, when you think about it, to do it differently, you know, to do it more adaptively, you know, so that people aren't getting hurt along the way, or being elected to perform positions or do things that really they should just be kids, you know. So, yeah,
Could I share two more things?
please.
My favorite quote was on page 38. He says, "What struck me that day was that this process that was happening between us was bigger than all of us,
Yes,
that it
is.
had a life of its own."
Yeah.
That was very, I like that a lot. And I just put at the end of the chapter, for me, my summary,
Mhm.
or my summarizing thought from the
Mhm.
chapter was that we have to remember that our therapy sessions are not for the purposes of our research, that
This is
our
true.
clients are
This
not
is
our
true.
research subjects.
It's bigger than us, it's about them. And you know, the other thing we have to keep in mind too, I'm glad you brought this up, is that even though clients come in and they say they want help, they have every right to sabotage treatment. It's up to them, you know, and we shouldn't take it home and hit ourselves in the head that we failed, you know, because they may not be ready for it. Unconsciously, they may sabotage. Consciously, they may sabotage. They might not be ready for it. We shouldn't punish them for that. That's their right, you know. So we have to have a lot of respect for a person's pace, their ability to tolerate discomfort, and it can be a very uncomfortable process. It obviously was for Carolyn and David in this first 10 chapters. Stephanie, you had 4 of them with the schizophrenia as well, right?
Yes. In chapter 4, we start talking about how families do look at as a system.
Mhm.
And we first look at the schizophrenic, they call him schizophrenic son,
Mhm.
and how that he doesn't exist by himself. That there's a family and a family system. And we talk about how in the hospital, they started watching how he interacted with his mother.
Yeah, and the mother would pull away.
Yeah, when he would hug her,
Hug.
he would hug her.
Yeah, you'd
she
think,
would pull away.
yeah.
And then when he pulled away, she would say,
Why are you
"What-
pulling
yeah,
away?"
what's the
Yeah.
problem?"
So-
And so he was always in a confused state.
Yeah.
So he just learned how to
Put in a
function.
bind, yeah. You get mixed messages enough in life, you don't come out with a great set of life skills with mixed messages. So sometimes we're guilty of such. I can remember growing up, every so often, we'd get a phone call, you know, and mom would hear who's on the other line, and she'd go, "Tell them I'm not here. Tell them I'm not home." She's not home. She's teaching me to lie, right? Now, these are the mixed messages that sometimes we get. Don't lie, but lie. Okay, all right.
I recently saw in a movie where that was happening in a scene with a very young child.
Uh-huh.
And she said, "My mommy says to tell you she's
More honest. I never thought that far ahead. All right, yeah, so, yeah, the double bind, you know, we get these mixed messages all the time. Not good for us growing up. We have too many other things that are going to take our time and attention, let alone deal with mixed messages in a family situation. Which leads me to an actual case that I had in the military. A family was this was during the time when the forces were drawing down, which meant that they were cutting back on personnel. And so they asked a particular, several families, but one of the families I eventually, I saw the mother in this family situation. They didn't want to leave the military. The husband had been in for like 10 years. He was looking to make it a career. And even though he was going to get a pretty decent severance package, he didn't want to leave the military. So, but they're coming to terms with it. They're trying to fight it. But they're still kind of coming to terms with it. But they're still fighting ferociously to stay in. In the meantime, the daughter is deteriorating. First, she's having social anxiety. She's having anxiety in terms of going to school. All right, she doesn't want to go to school. Now, she's like 14. You don't usually see these problems at 14. You see them at 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there, and then they resolve over a brief period of time, usually. But not at 14. The separation anxiety thing was just, it's starting to show at 14. Well, the family is still very much focused on staying in the military. So it's no wonder that her anxiety mutated. It mutated to depression. All right? And now she's involved with seeing a psychiatrist and the father's being seen by somebody else. I get assigned the mother. I actually was only able to see the mother once because she canceled out on me several times because she wanted to have bunion surgery and all this stuff. She wanted to take care of business before they actually left the military. At the same time, the daughter is continuing to deteriorate. She eventually commits suicide. The daughter commits suicide at age 14. All right. Now, when you think about it, she just took care of her family, didn't she? Because they probably had insurance on her, right? So they not only probably got a life insurance policy, but they sued the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist, one of the best psychiatrists I've ever worked with, after months of being harassed by that lawyer that they had hired, settled out of court. Best psychiatrist. Really, in this situation, that family was culpable for the deterioration of what was going on with the daughter. They're focusing on everything but the daughter. They're canceling their mental health appointments. They're not monitoring medications. The psychiatrists I I knew for many years, would have asked them to have done.
That, kind of reminds me of, in this chapter, they talk about how sometimes in the family, when there's a problem, one of the members of the family will be left like as a Christ figure, kind of like sacrifice themselves.
Yeah. Claudia,
for the better good of the
Claudia, on some level, probably did some of that, but she was probably appointed on some level too. So she might have volunteered, combo, appointed type of thing. But once she got into that role, that was a role she couldn't extricate herself from without permission from the family. And half of the battle with therapy is teaching the family to give her permission to do that, even though they didn't say it that way. That would be the challenge. So okay. So the one thing we know is that when the focus moves away from Claudia relaxes, but when the focus moves onto the family, the anxiety in the family increases, right? And vice versa, right? So, okay. Chapter 5. We had that one. Chapter 5. Oh, did anybody get that one? No? Okay. Well, chapter 5, everybody's happier. Huh, we're happier. We're feeling good. Yeah, better. And good old Carl, he says, congratulations, that won't last. Which is true. It's a honeymoon. You typically see improvements, and the best thing you can do is predict that it's not going to be the steady incline of improvement. We're going to have ups and downs because they're going to happen. And if you predict that they're going to happen because you know they're going to happen, and they do happen, then there's a certain amount of credibility that goes to you as a clinician. If you say, oh, good, looks like everything's going to work out then in the end. Okay, and then the next week is a bad week, you've lost some credibility in your eyes, right? So it's better to be honest because you know things aren't going to be picture perfect with just a few sessions underneath the belt. Okay, so, but they also changed things up because in the first, few sessions, they kind of took direction. They asked questions, they, pressed for information. All of a sudden now, they're just sitting back. You saw that transition? Sitting back, they're just waiting, not saying anything. And David, the whole family, there's a whole period of silence, and they're starting to feel very uncomfortable. And finally, David breaks down and says, basically, let's see, what does he say? I guess we're waiting for you guys to start us off. And then Carl says something, oh, we're waiting for you. But we can wait longer.
One thing, right around that point, right before David starts to talk, and this, I noticed it throughout the book, but I was really impressed by how Gus, right?
Yeah,
Gus.
Augustus, Gus.
And I'm sure Carl too, but Gus was so introspective.
Yeah.
To notice his shortcomings.
They share what's going on in their heads, and they actually acknowledge, maybe they're falling short in some domains. Yeah.
How anxious he was getting with the silence.
Yeah.
But
He had to focus on
Right.
relax,
Breathe.
relax. Sometimes you have to do that. Silence is a wonderful promoter of engagement.
it was encouraging to know that as therapists, we don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Or pain-free.
And another thing I learned in the military, which I think is a good lesson, one day when I was kind of running around, I was multitasking way too much. My mentor, psychiatrist, said, never work harder than your client. And you should never work harder than your client. That was a good lesson. And because you can't do for them what they need to do for themselves. So anyway, so he puts it on Dad to start, that we can wait longer. And so Dad starts, and why the switch? Why did they go from being proactive and asking questions and interpreting and pointing things out to now total silence. Why the switch?
Because then they're doing the work for them.
That's right, exactly, exactly. They're doing the work for them. They've got to take ownership of this process. And the sooner they do it, the better, right? They got them started, but now they're ready. They're prepped now to start working. And only they can do what needs to actually happen in this family, which is change the dance. So okay. So anyway, they talk, and a little focus goes on Claudia again. And David definitely wants to talk about the relationship with Claudia. And so Carl says, well, why don't you talk to her, not us? Which is another good thing, you know? Because again, they don't want to foster dependency on them, right? So David tries, and he asks, you know, Claudia, what did I do to betray you? And of course, Claudia doesn't want to talk about it. Silence, and he tries again, and you know, and you know, he says something to the fact, you know, sometimes I do try to defend you to your mom, and the mom agrees. Did you notice what happened then? The clinician say, hey, Mom, you know, they're just getting into it. You know, hang back a bit. You know, let them struggle this one out. Yeah. They're trying to avoid what we call triads. You saw that in the reading somewhere along. Some family therapy is a lot about triads. You know, two people have an issue and they try to draw a third person in. Then it starts to get real complex and convoluted and you don't get anything done. So you just try to keep it simple. Just the two try to work things out while everybody's watching, all right? Okay, so she pulls back and then they work on some more things. And then now let me see. If I got this right. Okay. So basically the same story starts to emerge. You know, there's a conflict between Mom and Claudia, and then Claudia escalates, goes to her room. You know, Dad tries to figure out what's going on, and so forth. Now Claudia's getting mad because she's saying, well, do you guys really want me to go crazy? You know, so she's spewing this stuff out. And then Laura notices this and starts to ask, what's wrong with Claudia? You know, and then Mom says something like, oh, Claudia will be okay. And it's amazing. I thought this was kind of cool. At this point in time, Carl says, well, why don't you, you know, try to help your sister? Why don't you do something? Comfort her, Laura. And so what does Laura do? She goes over to her sister to comfort her. And then, you know, Claudia is kind of crying, but kind of smiling too. She hugged Laura. You know, they hug each other, she's saying. And then David says something, I wish I could have done that. And Carl says something to the effect of, well, you can still do it, you know. But he doesn't. He's not there yet. He doesn't. So anyway, they're still figuring out what this dance is all about, and eventually, they're looking at the anger, and they're looking at the triangles, the triangulation, and that sort of thing. And they're talking about who's aligning with who. You know, Don tends to align with Mom. Claudia tends to align with Dad, and so forth. And Laura's kind of off to the side. Okay. But they're also pointing out that, you know, on some level, Claudia is the conduit through which the parents fight. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did you catch that? So when mom's angry at dad, she gets on Claudia. And when dad's angry at mom, he supports Claudia and gets back at mom. So she's the conduit for all the anger. And again, they're trying to get this all through. And they're also pointing out that, on some level, Claudia and Carolyn are imitating Carolyn's mom. Because his mom was apparently this controlling person. So each of them are trying to control each other. Claudia's trying to control her mom. Mom's trying to control Claudia. No one's winning in this situation. I just wanted to read something here. It was on page 103. I thought it was kind of interesting. 103. It's in the middle there. So you become your mother in this dance, and Claudia's become like the part of you that wanted to stand up to your mother and didn't dare to. Carl was smiling. Carolyn did rebel at Carl's deceptively bland comment. She flared in anger. But I don't arrange for Claudia to defy me. She does it without my permission and over my strenuous objection. It makes me furious when she defies me. Sorry, Carl said shortly. What he meant and what was communicated was, you're wrong. And in a tough, even voice, he said, what you get credit for is what happens, not what you want to happen. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You may see it one way, but the reality is this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. All right, so anyway, and they kind of end on the note that, Carolyn, you can change. You can stand up to Claudia in an adaptive way, in a respectful way, in a way that means business that's fair. You could do that. And eventually she does do this in time, but it takes her a while. All right?
Yeah, I liked, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I liked that he was basically explaining to her a totally new way of parenting.
Yes.
That made her
Hello.
not a drill sergeant parent, but a
Yes.
consultant parent.
Yeah. And
Where it
it's-
really would help their relationship if she could just change her parenting
change
style.
the dance. Here we can change the dance. You have the, and you have the power to do so many things in life. We talked about this in another class, I think, that sometimes we surrender our peace of mind because of irrational thoughts that we have in our head. Because we think that we know this isn't true, but sometimes we have this in our head that people should always treat us with respect. Right? We know it's not true. Not everyone's going to treat us with respect, but we have it in our heads. Because when we, like I've said before, when we walk past a person, we smile and we say hi, and they don't smile back and they don't say hi back to us, what happens to us? What goes on in here? Hopefully maybe that, but sometimes we go, oh, I'm upset. That just ruined my day because they didn't say hi to me. I get depressed. I've given up. I've surrendered my peace of mind right now by just surrendering that.
I like what she said about, changing the parenting style and working with the families. And one of the things we role model a lot in our sessions is, we'll take a candle and we'll give, everyone in the family a candle. And then we'll go over and we'll light their candles while ours is lit. And ask them the question, okay, my candle's lit, now your candle's lit. Did any of my flame extinguish because now yours is lit? And the whole concept behind it is understanding that I can be in
I don't have to
control.
lose anything.
Exactly, but you can also be in control without administering my control.
Exactly. Exactly.
They see it that way and they tend to get it, so I completely.
So a symbol can be a nice way. And they did that with the seating arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
Here was a symbol of something that they were hoping to get in on a deeper level. So anyway, you can do things differently, and again, it's kind of neat that Carolyn eventually did do something differently. We're coming to that in a bit. Did anybody have chapter 8?
I had chapter 7. I don't know where it is.
Did I skip 7?
Yeah,
That's
we
why
were
you
in 6.
yeah.
We were in 5.
Oh,
Six.
I skipped a whole bunch of them then. isn't it?
You did real well though, let me
Yes.
tell you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shirley. All right, chapter 6. Who had chapter 6?
I had chapter 6.
Please, Alexis.
Yeah, so chapter 6, I thought it was a really good chapter because it was almost one of those chapters that could have been put at the beginning of the book.
This is true.
Because
This is
it
true.
really talks about a lot of times, at least with us when we get our referrals, it's always, you gotta fix these. And thankfully with Rock-On, we get everybody, but it's so much more than it's what you said, a lot of times, it's maybe the parenting structure,
Mhm.
or, just different things of that. And so I like how they kind of focused on, hey, let's take the attention off the scapegoat.
Mhm.
Let's take it off of Claudia and let's kind of focus on what the real issues are. We
Mhm.
talked about stress and the triangulation and everything within that.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, I think this could have been, even a great first chapter.
It
because
could
this
have
is
been.
the starting point.
It
of
could
what
have
we
been.
really need to look at and see,
Yeah.
not just that youth.
And I really like that they try to get across the idea that no one's to blame. Everybody kind of, everyone plays a role, so on some level, no one is to blame. Everyone needs to take responsibility for this situation. Yes. So learn a different dance. Nothing wrong with that. Chapter 7. What do we got there?
Chapter 7, was pretty much, the first thing that was presented with the family was Claudia's defiant behavior and the way she and her mother worked off of each other. And
Back and
how
forth,
the father
back and
would,
forth.
they just could triangulate him in there, and he would in fact side with Claudia, which would drive the mother crazy, or not crazy, made her very angry. Made her very angry and very.
So he's
pushy.
trying to withdraw from that process a bit.
And they're trying to back him off. I just call it a smoke screen, because get rid of the smoke screen, put a fog in,
Mhm.
see what's really
It's a good
happening
analogy.
here.
Yeah.
And
So they can work it out.
Yeah,
Right?
'cause- and it's very eerie when you've done any research into your own family or just any families when you work with them.
Mhm.
How many times patterns are repeated or scenarios are repeated?
Endless.
And here, Claudia's the oldest daughter.
Yeah.
Carolyn was the oldest daughter. Her mother was very, very controlling. The father was very passive, not like her husband who goes out and works. However, he was unavailable in that he would just be sitting around and not working and being very passive. But when the mother,
That's a good
grandmother-
parallel. That's
yeah,
a good parallel.
when the mother would come in and attack, Carolyn, the grandmother would come in, the ghost, the
Mhm.
grandmother,
Right,
still alive, very
right.
much alive, but that spirit's still there.
Right.
Would come in and attack her oldest daughter, the father would side with her,
Right.
which would make,
Yeah.
it was the same dichotomy. that
Yeah.
as
And
said-
mom never stood up to her mom.
Never,
So
but it's interesting how she kind of has arranged it so her daughter is
stands up
standing
to her.
And then
Right.
she's so shocked.
She's
by
doing
it,
what
she's
she
doing
wished
it
she
like
could have
that.
done. Yeah. But then she blames her daughter for doing that.
Right.
So she's caught in a double bind, is what they would say. Yeah.
But don't you think that's, I heard you say the word that's kind of eerie, the way you find things out. I think it's actually quite comforting. I think you finally go, oh.
Now it makes sense.
Right,
Yeah.
this
It's
is.
eerie and yet it makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes
Yeah.
sense, and a part of it is semi-comfortable, comforting, I think, in the sense that you can depend on these tribal mentalities, which I think in the Western world we tend to move away from. But family models are like this. We hope that you become this apprentice that you can model after and you keep your family line going.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that.
It's too bad we can't just take the good.
Right.
If we could, take our parents and say, that's good, I'm taking that, that's good, I'm taking that, that's good.
But I think
We
it's
take
valuable
something
also
good
to
and
take,
bad.
to digest what we consider negative.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we live in a world that's so dualistic that you're either good or you're bad, except for there are so many things that we consider bad that have actually taught us quite a bit, and it's the only reason that we understand good.
This is true.
So sometimes challenging the language and not saying, well, man, your grandparents were a disaster, or not, or they were doing what they
Right.
could do, and it just suggested that perhaps they also had a model that perhaps was maybe flawed, if we called it flawed,
Yeah.
if we still didn't use that dualistic language.
Here's my 2 cents worth to tack on to what you just said, is that even though I would never ever choose to go back and relive some of the things that I've lived through. If I've given a choice, I wouldn't go back and do, I'm glad I don't have a choice. Because a lot of what has happened to me in my life have made me who I am today. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. So yeah, it is frustrating that we have to go through some stuff. But sometimes they're learning experiences despite the pain. And they're good learning experiences. It was good that Mom didn't want to pass on, the style that her parent expressed to her. But despite not wanting to do it, she ended up doing it. And so now we're caught in a dance that is generational.
But don't you think that a lot of that is, you made a comment earlier about behaviors that are fear-driven? Sometimes I think it's that, you can call it this fusion of paranoia and fear, and then you get this, sort of
You're fearful.
morphed.
You're fearful of what you don't know.
Right.
And also you have to acknowledge it. How do you teach what you have not learned? Right? I mean, it's one thing to pick up a book and read it, but you have to pick up the book and read it, right? But if you don't have that book to pick up, you can't teach it, right?
But I just thought, this is a good example where, they send their daughter out to, here, go get psychologized. Okay, someone's gonna try to fix you, and then the parents are just waiting in the lobby like, we can't get our daughter back, like, we just hope she's done, as opposed to going, I wonder what's happening within our life. They have the most information. Psychologists or therapists have the least amount of information.
Right.
The parents and the family have the most amount of information, and
They
yet
just don't know how to interpret it sometimes.
they just don't tap into it. And instead of going, what's wrong with my child, they're going, sitting down and going, okay, let's just look around the room, maybe sit in front of a mirror, perhaps. But yeah, I just think it's fascinating to kind of.
What is really truly amazing in this book is that eventually the family starts dawning on them what they've been doing. And they're starting to give everybody permission to be true to themselves. And it's amazing. It's sort of like if you start dating somebody and you're not whole yourself, right? You have holes, like you're a cup with holes in it. You try to fill it up with water, what's going to happen? The water's going to run out of the holes, right? Well, if you've got holes and you meet somebody else who has lots of holes in their cup, and you try to get together, well, you're not helping each other. And I think the bottom line in this book is that, hey, let's plug up the holes. Let's learn to be, more less dependent upon others to fulfill our needs, and more secure in ourselves to be able to meet our needs. Then we have more to give to each other. Does that make sense? Sort of like if I'm a person who gives and gives, never can say no to anybody. Right? Some people like maybe you're a person like that. You can never say no to anybody. Now, how long can you keep doing that without getting sick? Is my question. Okay? Eventually, you're going to break down, and when you're sick, who are you good to? You're good to no one. You're not even good to yourself then, because you're sick. Right? So sometimes the most selfless thing you can do is to be maybe what we term selfish. But I call it taking care of the Holy Spirit and the temple of God. Being good to yourself. That's good. Taking care of yourself, it's not selfish. It's being selfless. Because when I take care of myself, I can give you something. Right? So we got it backwards sometimes, I think. That's my sermon in the mouth. All right, anyway. All right, so how about chapter 8? We're getting there.
All right, so chapter 8, got a few things from it. So going into it, the first couple pages, it goes into the no sex life between.
Yeah,
so
here
lack
we
of
are,
sex
big
life,
topic in
lack
front
of-
of Laura.
So they start kind of asking everybody what they think of their parents' sex life. And so Claudia has kind of the first say in it, and so she tells them that she doesn't think they have it or do it very much, and that she thinks her dad probably does more of the work, and so it's a little awkward. And then Don gets asked, he gets a little bit more awkward, so he doesn't really have a say. And then Laura, it's a very playful conversation between her and Carl, and again, it goes through the whole him talking through her. And it's very
Yes.
playful, very
Yes.
just kind of,
Yeah. Reduce the anxiety, because
Uh-huh.
we're talking about a heavy topic here.
yeah. And so, they bring up that one of the issues there, which isn't the main issue, is the concept of sex between his parents, is that Claudia is having sex, whereas her parents probably aren't.
Yeah, she's being promiscuous, in
Mhm.
fact, which actually is the opposite of intimacy, real intimacy. When you're just involved with lots of people at the same time, you're never gonna have an opportunity to be really, truly intimate with one person.
Mhm. Which then goes into how she's probably searching for that tenderness, slash mothering that she's not getting
Not
from her
getting,
own mother.
right? Exactly. Right.
So then they start talking about the possible quote unquote affair. that her
Yeah,
parents are
I'm glad you
having.
picked up on that, yeah.
And so David, his work, whereas Carolyn is her kids or her mother, which she's been using to kind of escape away. So both of them have this type of affair, which Carolyn isn't really too fond of the term, because I think he asked her in there like, oh, do you think he's having an affair? And she says, oh, well, not, or are you guys having an affair? Not that I know of.
They're thinking,
Yeah.
they're thinking of the word affair, and but
Yeah.
Carl is trying to, yeah, he's having an affair with his job, you're having an affair with your mother, basically. You know, so, maybe you're both just, moving apart.
Yeah.
type of thing.
And then it gets really, really heavy when David finally escapes out of his very like phlegmatic, like really undertone, like not really in the conversation, where he kind of, lets Carolyn have it. And the status changes.
Yeah, and then she collapses into tears.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Which then I think it's Gus who picks up on kind of how the status has changed. So now David is kind of taking on the mother role, and she's taking on the daughter role, and so that's where transference happens, where she's allowing her husband to take on this role. And so it kind of goes over how we tend to. It's not necessarily our parents, but it can be our grandparents, our cousins, sibling, whatever it is. But whenever we've had a traumatic or some kind of experience that has really we've held on to, we tend to give people that opportunity to hold on this like status
Yeah.
above you.
Yeah, yeah. And on some level, even maybe look down and try to do therapy on the other person. And I think Carl kind of accused them of both trying to do therapy on the other.
Yeah.
And they kind of denied it, but then he points out some examples of where they might have been doing it, and they kind of back away from that. So that affair thing, again, that's a good insight. They were having affairs and not really recognizing it themselves. Because they're thinking of affairs in the way we normally think of affairs, infidelity. They're not thinking of it as being, involved with something to the exclusion of somebody else.
Emotionally unfair.
Exactly.
Which
Emotionally
actually
unfair.
the affair part kind of sinked in a little bit more when he talks about, or they talked about how we tend to bring too many needs to marriage.
That's a good point too. Yes, you do.
And so that's why they kind of escape. Like he talks about how am I going to help my spouse when I have a problem too? And so instead of bringing it and talking about it and discussing it, they've kind of separated, and that's where they're kind of outlets.
And they're trying to make that point that sometimes we enter into marriage or relationships with these ideas of how it's supposed to work, and we end up kind of depending on people way too much, And then they start disappointing us, which of course, if we depend on them too much, we're going to set ourselves up for disappointment, because nobody can be our savior, right? But and then we're gonna get disappointed. Then we're gonna get fearful. Then we're gonna get angry, and then we're gonna start pushing each other away. And this is the dance that we see happening here.
It made me think of something when you said that. I had a kid that I was working with, and his mom drug addict, dad fell into prison, all that stuff,
Ooh.
and he really suffered from abandonment. And I've been working with this kid for 2 years, so we have a really good rapport. And one of the things I told him is, I'm not available this weekend. This is a few months back. I'm getting married, and I can't answer your calls, whatever.
Right.
You can call me on a daily basis.
Right,
And
right.
he called me in the middle of the night, like crying, like the
Yeah.
morning of my wedding. It was like a whole thing.
Oh,
But then
Lord.
afterwards, he just stopped calling. And I like tried talking. I was like, "What's going on?" He's like, "No, f you, I hate you." Da da da. And I was
Yeah,
like,
just went off in the other direction.
It was because I got married. In his mind,
Yeah.
because of his dad.
Now
he
you're
would have a
you're
girlfriend.
unavailable.
Exactly.
You
like,
deserted, betrayed him.
His dad would abandon him for these girls, so
Mhm.
he felt now that I had a man in my life and I was getting married, that
Mhm.
he didn't matter anymore. And it was like trying to get him past that point. He's fine now. This was months ago, but it really does affect these, kids or adults or
You know,
whatever. It's
and,
hard for
and,
them.
and adults can misinterpret things all the time. We can misinterpret things all the time. And the beauty of therapy, hopefully, is that we catch those misinterpretations and we help people cognitively reframe things more appropriately. If we can do that, we've done our job, you know. And if that results in behavioral change, then they've done their job. You know, it's a win-win situation.
One thing I really liked from the chapter was page 117. It says, talking about how people have problems that they bring into the marriage. Kind of below the middle point of page 117, they are matched in the seriousness of the problems that they bring to marriage. So on the surface, they may not have the same problems, or maybe one person
Yeah.
seems to have a problem,
But they parallel each other.
yeah, that was
That's
very insightful
And that is true, oftentimes.
and scary.
Yeah, it is, it actually is. And then, you know, a lot of what happens in relationships that start to crumble, the precursor is fear. It's scary. Something has frightened us. Then it gets translated into anger, and then they get justified, they feel justified in staying angry. Instead of addressing the fear issue, they stay at the secondary level. And it's a no-win situation there. Chapter 9?
I had chapter
Yeah?
9. Yeah. So this chapter was the big blowout between Claudia and Carolyn. But I thought that there was another interesting thing going on in this chapter. Gus was really intentional about humanness, like the therapist's humanness in this chapter. So he starts off the chapter describing what is happening when he gets home from work, with his family, and his kids are excited to see him, and they're going to plan a bike ride later. And then he talks about Carl and how Carl's planning to go sailing with his wife, and so
They're human too.
yeah, and that's kind of woven throughout the chapter. So that's how it starts out, and then the Bryce family, there's a crisis. They need to go into work, and they come in and they start explaining what had happened between Carolyn and Claudia.
It was real intense what happened. There was a fight, and
Yeah.
somebody said some bad words, somebody got slapped, and
Yeah, and I think the interesting part about that was, again, Claudia gets caught in the middle where that's not even really what the mom is upset about. The mom feels like they don't appreciate her, and like she's having to do all the work and everyone's doing something else. And Claudia, who's the one person that helped, is the person that kind of gets the brunt of that anger, and rightly so, because Claudia, not really so, but
she's exacerbating
yeah.
the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, she has to take some ownership somewhere.
Right. So she has an attitude, sets the table with an attitude, says really terrible things to her mom, and then her mom hits her. And
She's not the only one doing it though, but
Yeah.
she's the target,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't respond positively to it.
Yeah.
She fights back,
Yeah.
which isn't right either.
Yeah. And so, anyway, I thought that it was interesting when they come in and they're kind of looking to the therapist to be referees, and immediately they start trying to go through the therapist, or Carolyn starts to go through the therapist to talk to Claudia. And right away Carl is like redirecting her and asking them to hash it out. And I think because earlier in the chapters they had he talks about how they get to this boiling point and then they simmer down, and they never just let it go, and so they're able to finally let it go. But I thought another thing that was interesting was hearing Gus's like inner dialogue, or
Mhm.
as he's
Right.
like,
They're vulnerable and they're sharing their thoughts with us. I think that's pretty cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, I think that it's good to hear. In my job, I'm a women's dean,
Mhm.
and sometimes girls come in and they're talking about like really heavy things, you know, or and I don't always know like the right thing to say, or if I should, or sometimes it's roommates that are coming in,
Yeah.
and I'm like, is this helpful what you're doing, or like, do you guys need to duke it out this much, or do I need to step in? And so it was really good for me to like hear the uncertainty in Gus, and
Yeah,
like,
these are seasoned
are we
clinicians.
supposed to do something
Right.
now, you know?
Yes, yes.
So,
But even seasoned clinicians will still have some questions about
yeah.
whether this was a right way to do it in this situation. Or sometimes it could be a number of right roads
Mhm.
simultaneously. You could go down this road or this road, and it's all 3 or 4 roads would be obviously acceptable.
Mhm.
You know, so sometimes you wonder, but sometimes there are many right roads too. But out of all the chapters, this seemed to be like the one that's the pivotal one. This is a turning point. This is where Carolyn is starting to get it, right? It's your attitude, you know, and something's got to change. It can't keep going on like this. Something's got to change, and you know, attitude's got to change, or you got to leave. And then she throws out, or I got to leave. You got that, right? That's pretty insightful, right? You know, but we can't keep doing this. You know, something's got to change. The attitude, what's going on in terms of this relationship, or you leave or I leave. But something's got to change. It just cannot keep going this way. And boy, did she get everybody's attention when she went down that road, didn't she? This is a pivotal turning point. This is where the dance is beginning to actually change. And this is what they worked hard to create in this family system, to change the dance. Now, if Carolyn wasn't willing to walk through that door, you know, then it's hollow words. But you get the sense she's ready for it. She's ready for the change. The dance is going to stop one way or another. And that's the beauty of therapy. Now we're ready for a change.
Did this all occur in the 15 to 20 weeks, like, or was there more that was included?
As far as we know, this is what we have.
I didn't know.
I don't have a background to anything. I should go looking for it, because I know, like, if you guys have heard of Gloria with Fritz Perls and Carl Rogers, there's more to that story. And I found a book where the daughter wrote about her mom's experience. It was kind of eye-opening. But I need to look to see if I can find something with behind this story. But let's see if I can find something here I want to read on page, 137? I thought it was kind of cool, because he's calling them on something. I thought that was kind of cool. You know, they get to a point now, things have simmered down, and they're starting to apologize to each other. But on page 137, let me just start a little further up. It said, that look you gave each other was a start, Carl said. Do you want to take it further? Are there things you want to say to each other? I'm sorry I lost my temper, Carolyn said contritely to Claudia. Claudia, still hurt and angry, answered moodily, me too. She deliberately left it unclear whether she was apologizing or blaming her mother further. The encounter was forced. You characters, Carl chided them. You're not sorry. Even if you're not quite as angry as you were a few minutes ago, don't make believe you didn't say what you said. That's when we really do mean what we say, when we're angry. So you blew up, so what? Let's go ahead. He's not pulling any punches, is he? He's calling it just the way he sees it. You guys aren't really sorry, right? But let's move on. We can do that. And they do. They do. And then we get to chapter 10. What happens in chapter 10? Who's got that one?
I do. In this chapter, well, Claudia and Carolyn when they go back for their next session, they're actually sitting in the same couch, so,
It's like,
yeah.
what happened? The dance did change. Now they're sitting next to each other.
Yeah, and they're, Don, the son, is talking about how they even had conversations together, and
Yeah.
even though,
Yeah.
that it made it seem like they were friends.
Yeah.
So.
So you can see that the previous chapter was the change in the dance. Now they're enjoying the after fruits of the change of the dance.
And then they even talk about stopping therapy. So,
Yeah,
which-
and they even called it boring. Did you catch that? It's starting to get boring now. So maybe we should have a timeout, basically. And there's a little fear, right?
Right, it seems like Claudia and Carolyn have fear, and everyone else is pretty.
Kind of, we're okay.
Right. I read that David and John were a little bit happy, and maybe even Laura, but
It's mixed.
yeah, it was mixed.
Mixed.
Yeah.
But in the end, they agreed to like a 1 week,
One week and then
Timeout.
call if something arose.
which is a good place to stop with reading. So we had the 10 chapters. We had a chance to see the progression from where did it start? All on Claudia, right? And that's where, and Don didn't show up to the first session. They get everybody on the same sheet of music. Don shows up for the next session. They start to disentangle the focus from being on Claudia to the family. You're getting the ground rules established, right? And then they start working on helping them see the dance that they're doing right now. This is what therapy is all about. Help them see the dance. Then, once they understand the dance that they're creating or they're engaged in, unconsciously or consciously, the challenge is to change the dance. And we saw that whole progression take place in our eyes. And how many pages?
Marion's chapter, it sounded, one way to interpret it as the therapists were working themselves out of the job.
Yeah, in a sense,
It's a terrible business model.
Jerry has said this many times, it's a terrible business model, but that's what we do as a profession. We're constantly trying to become unimportant in a person's life. We don't want to be constantly dependent upon to deal with it. We want them to get stronger so they don't need us. That's our goal, our end game with our clients. And if we're not serving that purpose ethically, we shouldn't be in that and working with those clients. If we're not helping them get better, we need to exit, refer. That's ethically our responsibility. Because we shouldn't keep taking their money. You know, this is so wrong. So anyway, that in a nutshell. Let me just pass this out. We'll talk about this next. Make sure you bring this back next week, right? Some of you have chapters for next week. Remember, participation is something important. So I need to ask a question of a few folks who didn't say anything. Send us up. What was your impression of what you saw happening or evolving in this whole 10 chapters? Obviously, you didn't have one of the chapters, but what impressed you the most?
Well, they have a lot of problems, that's for one. Yeah.
Not just one, right? They had many.
Yeah, just, it looked like they have a lack of communication within the family.
Yeah.
The only time they talk is when negative stuff is happening.
Yeah.
Nothing is usually ever positive.
And the negativity is feeding the negativity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Joshua.
I think well, sometimes men, they try to train here. I think
Sometimes women will do it too. I mean,
I'm
it
talking
just
from
depends.
my context, where I came from. Men, they are here, women are here. I think that's the condition of people here. I think.
Yeah, he stood on the sidelines for a while, but it ended up being that Carolyn stood on the sidelines the longest, you know. And she was, in a sense, pivotal to making the dance change. But if David didn't get on board with the process, that would not have happened at all. You know? It took, and you notice like in that one chapter, chapter 9, it was like the therapists were really keying on Carolyn to come into this process because she was sitting on the sidelines. And so the man in this situation kind of engaged a bit, but kind of sat on the sidelines for a bit, then engaged and back and forth a bit. But Carolyn kind of held out a little longer. But once she jumped in, she jumped in. But you're right, everybody's different. I mean, every family, every client is going to be different. And it's going to be you thinking on your feet, figuring out, how can I get them to hear? How can I say it in a way that they can hear it? That's the challenge. How can I say it in a way that they can hear it? Because I can certainly say it, but I might not say it in the right way, right? So that's a big challenge. In this thing, thank you guys for sharing, by the way, all of you, all right? So this thing is, next week, I know we have 5 more chapters, so we can squeeze this in next week. But this is talking about the value of an intake interview, all right? And I'll go over a little about what some of the things that we look at when we look at a mental status exam. So remember last time we talked, when I did my little mini presentation, we talked about circumstantiality and loose associations and things like that. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of other things, you know. And these are things that you usually, some of these things are things that you look for when you're thinking of psychoticism. Okay, so yes. Oh, sorry. I guess I just made just 8 more. I did?
Oh, no, I just had a question.
Okay, sure.
Just because I saw that, I don't know if we talked about it last week, how it says it's due for next week, so are we going to talk about it and then it's going to be pushed back?
Oh, we'll push it. Yes, that's a good question. We'll push it ahead another week.
Okay.
I'm very flexible when it comes to these things. I should probably go, thank you. Or some of you are, darn it, I'm ready to turn it. If you're ready to turn it in, turn it in. I don't, you know, I'll take it, I'll take it. So yeah. So we'll just, as we go along, we make adjustments. I'm very flexible with that. Yes.
But
yes,
to be
ma'am.
clear, this is the model, like, we're plugging in information and this is, the thing that's due in 2 weeks is this filled out.
The handout I sent you in the email, that's the model. You guys got the one in the?
Yeah, because this has tests administered and test results and validity. That's not on
That's
what
not,
you gave
no.
us.
I'm just gonna
So
talk a
don't use
little
this.
bit about a little more thorough process. But the most important thing out of this is when we get to like orientation, thought content, thought processes. These are some of the things that will go into your other reports. So you probably want to know a little bit more about that stuff. But that's typical in a standardized clinical intake.
So for ours, we're following what you sent us, right?
Exactly, the one in the email, that's the one. And hey, by the way, guys, that if you follow that template, follow it. That's why I gave it to you. I don't care, use the same headings, all right? Just follow that template and use complete sentences. Listen to me, okay? I'm anal. Use complete sentences. You know, put a period at the end if you have periods at the other ends, you know, complete sentences, right? So be consistent. Watch your punctuation. Start the sentence with a capital letter, right? All right? I know this is stupid, but yeah, sometimes I get papers in. It's just like a line. It's not capitalized. There's no period. The punctuation is weird. And it doesn't make any sense to me. So please. I'll take your art projects, yes.
This is the, can we say our rationalization, or we're supposed to write, mine's gonna die if I wait till next
I was
time.
wondering about one.
I need to walk around, you give me a little explanation, I'll take it.
Or you just need the people that did it?